I'm Lake Miller.
And I'm Hannah Brown. Welcome to Gem City Diversity, a podcast where we talk about diversity and inclusion in the Dayton area. We're from the National Conference for Community and Justice of Greater Dayton. We're NCCJ. NCCJ works in the Miami Valley to increase understanding around the topics of diversity and inclusion. In this episode, Lake and Maya interview Collin about gender affirming care. They discuss Collin's experience with gender affirming care, HRT, finances related to gender affirming care, and any advice that Collin has for someone who may be struggling to find gender affirming care. Enjoy!
So could you introduce yourself, your name, pronouns, and what you do in life?
My name is Collin Steele. My pronouns are he, him. I am a student currently at Indiana University Bloomington. I would like to do linguistics work in the future, though.
So we all have different definitions, I think, but I was wondering if you could talk about what gender affirming care means to you.
For me, gender affirming care is usually when I think about it, I think of like medical transitioning kind of things, such as HRT and gender affirming surgeries, such as like top surgery. However, I do also like recognize that there is a mental health component that I don't, and like relating to gender dysphoria and stuff like that, especially since with a lot of like the medical processes, there's a lot of barriers based on like who you're seeing with therapy and stuff like that. But I recognize that's part of it, although it's not necessarily a very salient part a lot of times.
So when seeking gender affirming care, could you discuss the possible obstacles with dealing with like insurance and stuff?
Oh yeah, so to get a lot of things covered by insurance, you have to jump through a lot of hoops with like mental health professionals. So like when I was seeking HRT, I had to have a letter from my therapist signing me off for insurance to even consider covering it. And then like for a while, there was a big question of whether they even would cover it or not, because for my insurance, the policy is a little bit weird sometimes. And like sometimes they say that gender affirming healthcare is not, not mandatory, not medically necessary. And so in those cases, my insurance, like if I made a misstep, my insurance would like throw me out for like considering that kind of healthcare is being covered. Sometimes they're also like finicky of like what parts they'll cover of like trans healthcare. Like I got top surgery and there was a lot of like finicky stuff about what parts of it they would cover and what parts that they wouldn't.
Is there a justification that they kind of provide as far as why there all of a sudden is a line in certain aspects of care? You know, like when they said we're not going to cover this aspect, did they say this is why?
Well, with like surgery and stuff, they were like, oh, well, this is more of like an aesthetic thing rather than like something that's really medically necessary.
Gotcha. That seems crazy to me looking at it. You know, and this is something when we talked to C had said some kind of similar things about insurance and how sometimes that can be a barrier. I guess what I'm curious about is like when you get that letter back or however insurance corresponds with you that says like, hey, we're not going to cover either this whole thing or this portion, like what happens at that point?
I mean, at that point, at least for me, like, you know, it's just going into like freak out mode if I'm gonna like pay for stuff. That being said, with insurance, they originally sent me a letter saying that they covered it, like it was approved. But later on, they were like, even though it was they approved the surgery wholesale, but they didn't like bit by bit approve. So like even though it was approved, it wasn't actually covered by my plan, which like was incredibly frustrating. Because like, you know, originally, you know, I was working under the assumption that insurance like was going to support like the surgery as a whole, and then they came back later being like, actually no, you do have to pay like this portion here because like we don't think it's necessary, even though like it was technically approved.
That's really frustrating. I mean, especially to kind of have that idea in the back of your mind that we already got the green light, you know, everything seemed good. So that's really frustrating. I guess, can you talk, I know you kind of said that you go into this panic mode of like, how in the world am I going to afford this? But can you walk us through a little bit more, like what was going on in your head when you got that letter back, or like what were your next steps in figuring out, is this still possible?
Well, it was more like I got the letter that said everything was approved, and then I got the bill where things weren't approved, where things weren't covered. And at that moment, I don't know, I guess I was just kind of shocked. And like the first thing that went through my mind is like, oh, something's wrong here, you know, like something was just like submitted wrong or something like that. But then when I like called insurance, they were him-hawing around for a while. Before they were finally like, I mean, you could file an appeal, but like at the end of the day, even like getting our approval doesn't really necessarily mean it's covered. So like it was mostly just shock, and then it like grew into like a lot of like frustration and anger about it. I know like I'm still like there's still a part of that bill that I haven't gotten back, that like could be like tens of thousands of dollars, that like has been really like paralyzing with like other parts of my life, because you know I don't want to like spend a lot of money if you know at any point I could be getting a huge bill when I like need to save that money for like paying it. But at the same time, I don't know if I'm gonna have to pay that whole thing, because like the hospital hasn't like the hospital and insurance haven't like finished deciding what's up with that, and so like nothing's been finalized. But it is like when I think about it, I get super frustrated about it.
I've seen on my social media many a times individuals who it sounds like are in very similar situations to you, who unfortunately have to revert to GoFundMe or other forms of like crowdfunding just to literally be able to afford these surgeries, which GoFundMe is not healthcare, or it shouldn't
Yeah.
be. I don't know if you've seen anybody else, you know, seen anyone in your life who's had to kind of do that, or maybe you've even kind of considered like, you know, do I have to sort out those other sort of funding sources?
Yeah, I've actually seen a couple people do that. There were like back in my high school, there were some people in the grade above me that I've like stayed connected to, who have, you know, been at various points in their transition. One of them wasn't for like surgery. It was just for like HRT. Another one was specifically for their top surgery. And like I know that he got some support, but it's definitely like nowhere near what he needed. And I know with like my brother, we were talking about it, and he like kind of half jokingly said he'd set up a GoFundMe for me. And he even like reached out to his friends, being like, hey, you wanna Venmo my brother $5 for his medical debt. So like there's a lot of crowdfunding things that happen. But for the most part, like from what I've seen, a lot of them don't get great response. Like they're not like nearly as supportive as one would hope they would be.
Well, and even that $5 from the friend, your brother's got to have a lot of friends to cover potentially.
Yeah.
You said it could be tens of thousands of dollars. Did anyone send you the $5?
No. My brother says he will at some point, but I mean, family, it's kind of different than like crowdfunding stuff. Like for me, I know that if at the end of the, depending on what's my financial situation is going to look like, I'll probably end up like begging family members first to help me make up the difference before like I take on medical debt, just because like I know it's really predatory.
So what seems really interesting to me about this situation is that you kind of got this letter saying it's all covered. You go and get the surgery done, and then you get the bill. And at that point, it's not like you can go back and say, oh, wait, I'm not going to do that. I can't afford this. So that seems like kind of the absurdity of this situation to me is you didn't even have the ability to sit down and look at your budget and look at the dollar and cents and say, can I afford this? And now you're stuck with you can't not pay them, so that seems like a really tricky situation. And I just really wanted to kind of bring awareness to that, because I think it would be one thing if you went into it with the mindset of, I'm going to have a $30,000 bill. It's a whole different thing entirely when you can't go back on a surgery.
Yeah, that was like a really big problem. There was also an issue with like sometimes like, just in general, like medical facilities aren't always like the most transparent. And so like at a maximum, I thought I was looking at a specific amount. And it turned out that the maximum, like once you factored in like the facilities and stuff like that, which like was not like not well discussed with me. It was the possible maximum was much higher, like tens of thousands higher. And during this time, because of like a lot of family health issues, we had actually like reached, we have a really high deductible for our insurance, but we had reached it that year. And it's like, I guess it was hard to grapple with the fact that, walking in with that assumption, like in theory, like surgery, in the best case scenario, surgery was going to be free. But then it turned out that there was like a lot of like hullabaloo in the middle. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily go back and change my decision, but I do think I would have done some things differently if I had known this before going in.
I can imagine that can be like just another hardship on top of the emotional and societal hardships of being trans.
But like, I've, I spent a lot of time ruminating in frustration about like how like, if I weren't trans, a lot of these expenses that like I face for like, like dealing with surgeries and like going through the process of HRT, which I will probably be on for the rest of my life. It's just like something extra that I have to worry about, some other like financial burden that people who aren't trans like don't have to deal with. And it's like really frustrating sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. I can only imagine. Do you have any tips for anyone who's struggling to find gender affirming care, or just getting through the frustration of that financial burden?
I have to say, I've like spent a lot of time stressing over finding gender affirming care. It's really hard for me to find medical professionals because like it's hard to know who is going to be trans competent and who is going to like respect you not only for the fact that you're trans but also like for other like parts of your identity and whatnot, because it's all intertwined, and so I spend a lot of time stressing about finding healthcare professionals in general, rather than finding them myself. If you're in the position where somebody who is like in the region who's also going through the same process as you, like also transitioning, referrals I find are the best bet. I like at this point I am very hard pressed to see like any medical professional without somebody who's trans competent or another trans person saying like, yeah, they're fine. Like they won't like treat you poorly. That being said, I know some cities will have, or like regions will have, like trans or like LGBT groups who will keep like lists of providers. While those lists may not necessarily cover like everything that you need, or they might not be completely up to date, they can be a good place to start to find providers, and those can also be good places just to like meet people who are more likely to be able to refer you. So it's good to seek out like those kind of groups if you happen to like have those resources available to you. And then I guess like dealing with things like dealing with the like extra burdens that come with those kind of things. I just like try and surround myself with like a good community of people. Like just like keep my support network strong, so that if like even if like things are really frustrating, I know that I have like people to fall back on who may not necessarily be able to financially support me, but can support me in other facets, and also like may have other ideas about what to do about a financial situation. Like I also know that like some groups, like some queer groups or like trans groups will offer like grants for people's transitioning costs. And so like just having like extra people to help you like look for those kinds of things can be really helpful.
Well, I have two last questions, and these are really kind of shifting towards what medical institutions can do in general. So when we talk about gender affirming care, or we talk about a medical establishment being trans competent or equitable or inclusive or any of these different terms, when you're looking at a healthcare provider, what are those tangible things that healthcare providers can do to contribute to a comfortable, welcoming environment?
I guess for one, being more deliberate about the language that they use. This is outside of like gender like affirming healthcare, but it's still like very closely related to like gender related stuff. Like my former gynecologist, which like is like that like medical aspect is like a really uncomfortable topic for a lot of trans folks, and just like an uncomfortable space to be in general. But like my former like gynecologist, even though she had like worked with trans patients in the past, sometimes like the wording that she could use would be like really uncomfortable. And while it isn't necessarily, medical terms and whatever, like in theory, like people don't necessarily have to change those kind of things. But like now the person that I see, who also is my like HRT provider, is like she makes the choice to be better about that kind of thing, to like be aware of how her patients feel with like the specific terminology that she uses, and like makes an effort to still be specific without like making her patients uncomfortable. So like being aware of that kind of thing is really important, I think. And like even my old HRT provider, he like, he was a good guy and he was affirming and stuff, but every once in a while he'd say things that would like just like make me uncomfortable about like trans folks. I believe at one point like he used like the T slur and I was like, oh no. But like that for one, I feel is a really important thing. But like, education about like trans stuff in general, like not, like if they're non like gender, like gender-based healthcare, just like learning about like trans stuff so that your trans patients don't have to like explain things to you, which like may be uncomfortable.
And can you real quickly, I was just going to say, would you mind just explaining, you said kind of non-gender based healthcare. Would you mind explaining for listeners kind of what non-gender based healthcare might be?
Like non, like, I don't know, transitioning healthcare, like, endocrinologists, general practitioners. I had a neurologist. I had like a really awkward conversation with my neurologist about like, I have chronic headaches. Like I've had them for a really long time. And like the conversation for a long time really went into like, like HRT and how like me being trans is like, like a potential like facet for that kind of thing, just because like hormones can change that sort of thing. But like the way that my like practitioner was like pushing it was like really uncomfortable because I've had these for a lot longer than I've been on HRT, and like that hasn't changed it. But like she just wasn't like understanding that and started asking some like prying questions. So like, non like HRT related professionals and like stuff like that, I guess.
Do you ever feel as though you have kind of the burden of educating your medical providers?
Every once in a while I do. Sometimes I don't. I try to avoid those kind of situations. Like I seek professionals who are trans competent. But like in the occasion that I'm working with a provider who isn't, sometimes I end up in a situation where I'm left like kind of having to explain myself, or like explain like trans issues or like parts of the trans experience or whatever, even though I don't necessarily like want to be talking about that with my provider, especially like, sometimes in the context that we're having those conversations.
Yeah, thank you. So I have one last question, and I want to make sure I'm being careful with making sure that you don't need to kind of reveal too much about yourself. So if you are not comfortable answering this, just let us know. But in our emails, when we were corresponding, you talked about kind of having a new therapist and about going through what that process looks like. I think about 6 months ago, I started the process myself of finding a new therapist, and that process was incredibly stressful, but I didn't have the added layer of needing to worry about, is this somebody who is gender affirming, and is this somebody who's going to be trans competent? And I imagine that adds a fair deal of stress to the whole ordeal. So I'm just wondering if you can talk at all, if you're comfortable with kind of what the process was like to find this individual, and kind of what your experience has been.
Yeah, sure. So getting to the person that I saw like recently was like a bit of a like process therapy wise. I have like needed to find a new therapist. I had needed to find a new therapist since, well, I don't know, like 2018, I guess. Like I was still talking to my old therapist, but like he was really specialized in like children, and I had moved, so we could only really email and stuff like that. That being said, I have like, I say I have a mixed bag of issues, like that I want to address. And so like one thing that was really difficult for me was like finding somebody who I felt like I could talk to about everything that I was dealing with. And then also somebody on top of that who was trans competent. And, I'd use stuff like Psychology Today, like their like therapist search and stuff like that. But it's like really hard when you're just looking at like, like a website to tell what the person's going to be like. And it was also a question for me of like, I like want somebody who's trans competent, but I also don't want like somebody who will be affirming of that kind of thing. But I was also like concerned finding somebody who would boil down my other problems as just like being related to like my gender and stuff. And a lot of it isn't. And so like that made it really stressful to find someone. When I started seeing my new HRT provider, we talked about these kind of things, and I talked about like the things that I wanted to work through in therapy. And she just whipped out a list of 4 people in town that I could call to try and make an appointment who could help me with all the things that I wanted to work on, while also like being trans competent. I had been seeing 2 of them for a while. I am going to like stop seeing one of them. But this person most recently was a psychiatrist that I was recommended, that I was referred to. And originally I'd been given a list of like trans competent psychiatrists from my therapist for people that I could look into for a referral. And, I got with this one office, and they called me back saying they were going to schedule an appointment after they like processed my referral and stuff like that. And they said that like they were scheduling me with somebody else. And that was like a really stressful interim period for me. Because like originally I'd gone in thinking that like, this was somebody I knew was like going to be like trans competent, so I wouldn't have to like worry about like being like pestered about that kind of thing while trying to seek like a new form of treatment. And it was like it was really stressful before my appointment, wondering whether this person was going to be affirming or not, and whether like there were going to be some uncomfortable conversations, because like dealing with somebody who like doesn't understand trans issues and like doesn't get trans people like period, especially in like mental health especially, can be like really, really hard to navigate, just because like you run the risk of being boiled down to like all your problems are just because you're trans. when I actually met her, she was nice. She like asked my pronouns and like made sure that like my legal name is my preferred name and stuff like that. And there wasn't really like a lot of uncomfortable conversations about like being trans, and it felt like it was still going to be a safe space, which was really, really nice. But I was also like kind of surprised about it, just because like that's definitely not always going to be the case.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you sharing that. All right. Well, we really appreciate it. I have personally learned a lot during this last half an hour and really, really enjoyed our conversation. So thank you for being willing to share your story and being willing to kind of have this conversation with us today.
Yeah, it was nice talking to you guys. Happy to come out.
Well, thank you.